never made it, but I know what it takes. I'm motivated by a mix of emotion. Got my statement, and I'm reading it slow so I can understand it fully. Appreciate my standing, go out of this world and right on time. Oh, never in my life have I seen the sky light up like this. I'm far away from Earth and I wanna know if you exist. Mission control, do you read me? Send me my coordinates.
Welcome everyone, welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd Family a part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. Before I get into today's video, let me first say that if you or anybody you know has any remedies that work for getting rid of a cough, please feel free to let me know. And I don't mean the same old generic answers that everybody's done and tried, because I've tried all them and none of them worked. But I've had this awful, terrible, really bad, horrendous cough for about a month, and I just cannot seem to get rid of it. I feel fine. I feel fantastic, but I just cannot get rid of this cough. If I get hot, I cough. I get cold, I cough. If I laugh, I cough. When I eat, I cough. I just cannot seem to get rid of it. So if you know anybody that has any remedies that work besides the same old generic answers that I've already tried, please feel free to let me know. But today here on the channel is going to be a college football video. You can never talk college football too much, but it's going to be a topic that I haven't really discussed in this much detail before. I thought about doing one of these videos last year, but I didn't. But I figured I would do it this year because, in my personal opinion, the Pac-12 was the best conference in America from top to bottom in quarterback play. Now, of course, there was a couple teams that were really, really bad, and that was because their quarterbacks sucked. But the game of football has changed so much. Used to, you could win with a game manager. You can't do that anymore. If your quarterback is a game manager, you can forget it. You're going to be a 7-win team, maybe 8-win team, and that's all you're going to do. So you have to have an elite quarterback. And I know it doesn't matter as much in college as it does the NFL, because in the NFL you draft your quarterback of the future, and he's there for 10 or 12 years, and generally you're good the entire time unless he gets hurt or is a complete bust, but most of the time they're not. But you just look around the NFL game right now. The Buffalo Bills were dreadful for 20 years, and they draft Josh Allen, and they're one of the best, if not the best team in the NFL. They're definitely the best team in the AFC right now. Also in the AFC, you have the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes. They went through a dozen quarterbacks in 25 years and were just treading above water. And they get Mahomes, and now look what he's done, and look what they've done. And you can look at Minnesota. Most people don't like Kirk Cousins, but they went out on a limb. They gave him that huge contract, and now they're one of the best teams in the NFL. The Cowboys were a 500 team for years, and then they draft Dak Prescott, and now look what they're doing. So that just shows you that quarterbacks do matter. If your quarterback ends up being what he's supposed to be, generally you're going to be a good team. If your quarterback sucks, generally you're going to suck. And in years past, the Pac-12's had one, maybe two teams that were good, and the rest of the conference was terrible. But there was a time this year there was 5 teams in the Pac-12 that were ranked, and I believe it's because of quarterback play. If you look at the quarterback play, 1 through 8, as I've written down, was great. Now, the bottom 4 or 5 weren't as good because their teams sucked. But the top 8 spots of quarterback play in the Pac-12 was great, and that's why all these teams were so good. Now I'm going to list 1 through 12 as I found it on the internet. And then there was one team that got left off the 1 through 12 ranking because one team had 2 quarterbacks listed. One team didn't have any quarterbacks listed, and I'll tell you why when I get to that team. But I'm going to go through each quarterback, and I've wrote them down 1 through 12 based on QBR because that's the most important stat for a quarterback. And then we'll mention their yards, but the yards is only passing yards, not rushing yards for the running quarterbacks, and touchdowns are only passing touchdowns. And then we'll mention their interceptions. And as I said, the team that got left off, I'll tell you why they got left off and who it was when I get there. But quarterback number 1 played last night, which in my opinion, that bowl game has been the best of the bowl games so far. That bowl game is what bowl games are supposed to be about. Now, I know the Arkansas game had a great finish, but that was only because Arkansas just fell apart in the fourth quarter. But Arkansas dominated quarters 1 through 3, and then in quarter 4, they just fell apart and then ended up winning the game in triple overtime. But the Oregon and Tar Heel game last night was a good game from start to finish, and that's what bowl season is supposed to be about. But quarterback number 1 is Bo Nix. He had a QBR of 87 with 3,389 passing yards, 27 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Caleb Williams, QBR of 86.5, 4,075 passing yards, 37 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. And then we had Cam Rising, still a phenomenal name for a quarterback. 82.9 QBR, 2,939 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. And then the guy who played quarterback at UCLA since 1975, he's finally a senior and finally graduated. Dorian Thompson Robinson, QBR of 81.9, 2,883 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. Number 5, Michael Penix Jr. He finally stayed healthy for the first time in his collegiate career for the whole season, and he had 4,354 passing yards, which I believe led the country. I'm almost positive last night watching the Holiday Bowl, they said that Drake May trailed Michael Penix Jr. by 100-something yards for leading the country in passing yards, and he had 29 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. And I said back around week 2 or 3 here on the channel that if Michael Penix Jr. could stay healthy all year long, then the Huskies had a chance to be pretty good. He did stay healthy, and they were really good. And he's got 1 year left of eligibility. He has to lead the country along with Caleb Williams going into next year, along with Marvin Harrison Jr., as far as Heisman frontrunners. Number 6, a guy that doesn't have flashy numbers, but that's because he didn't start the whole season. But once he became the starter, Arizona State got much better, and that was Trenton Bourguet. He had a QBR of 68.6, 1,490 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. And then we had Jaden DeLora. His QBR was 64.8, 3,685 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions. His QBR would have been much, much higher if not for 13 picks. You throw more than 1 pick a game, your QBR takes a big hit. It doesn't matter if you have 19,000 passing yards. You throw a pick a game, it greatly affects your QBR. And then we have Cam Ward, who had a 60.4 QBR, 3,231 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. And as I said, that 1 through 8 looks pretty good. And then the bottom quarterbacks were terrible. So in turn, their teams were terrible. Tanner McKee, 53.4 for Stanford as a QBR, 2,947 passing yards, 13 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. Next in line is a quarterback who is transferring again after leaving Florida and going to Arizona State, and that is Emory Jones. QBR of 49.9, 1,533 passing yards, 7 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. And I don't care where Emory Jones goes to, he can't throw. And if you can't throw, you just can't throw. Number 11, Jack Plummer. QBR of 49.5. I believe he's transferring too. 3,095 passing yards, 21 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. And then we have J.T. Shrout, who played for probably the worst team in all of Power 5 collegiate football, Colorado. No doubt he will not be their starting quarterback next season. QBR of 23.2. I've seen Pee Wee quarterbacks with better QBRs than that. 1,220 passing yards, 7 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. And then the team that got left off, and that was Oregon State. Now, the scary thing about Oregon State is that they were a 10-win team with only average quarterback play. So if they could get great quarterback play going into next season, they've got a chance to be really, really good. And I mentioned, I believe it was the week they played USC, if I remember correctly, that Oregon State was better than most folks realized. And I think I proved myself being right with them being a 10-win team. But a 10-win team with only average quarterback play, they're going to be scary if DJU goes there and ends up being as good as he was supposed to be coming out of college. Or out of high school, I should say. But now I will say that the Oregon State system fits him much, much, much better than the Clemson system did. But the reason why they got left off the list is because you have to have a certain amount of snaps to qualify for all the categories statistically. And since they played 3 quarterbacks and they never really stuck with one for a long period of time, none of their quarterbacks qualified for any of the stats. But their best quarterback was Ben Gulbranson. He had 1,455 passing yards, 9 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. And I think he threw right around 190 passes. That tells you he didn't play much. Most quarterbacks this day and time that start throw 190 passes in about 4 games. But they played 3 quarterbacks, and he was the one that played the most. But if DJU goes there and he fits that system like I think he will, they're going to be really good next year. But that's my list of the Pac-12 quarterbacks, and that's why I think the Pac-12 was so much better this year. Anybody that watches football and follows football nowadays knows it's not the way it used to be. It used to be you could go out there and win a game 10-7, and if your quarterback just didn't make any mistakes, you were good. Nowadays, you can forget that. The game's just played so much differently now. If you don't have an elite quarterback, you're not going to win. You'll win a lot of games, but you're not going to win the games that matter if you do not have an elite quarterback. That's just the way it is. That's the way it is now in high school, college, and the NFL. And that's why I hate when people always want to be prisoners of the moment when they want to compare players. And it's not just football, it's baseball, basketball, hockey, all of them. Because people are bad prisoners of the moment. And every time you see a great player, the first thing you say is, oh, he's the greatest ever. Well, most of the time it's not true. But second of all, it makes more sense to say the greatest of this generation. But if you look at football and definitely basketball, the games are played so much different now that you cannot begin to even compare nowadays players to the old days players. You look at Dan Marino. Dan Marino, for years and years and years, had every single category in NFL for quarterbacks that you could have. He broke, and he held them for years. He had most yards, most touchdowns, most completions, everything you could think of. Best QBR, most touchdowns in a game, most completions in a game, most completions in a quarter, whatever you want to look at. Dan Marino had it. But nowadays, you look at the same stats he had, and he's probably not even top 10. But it's because back when Marino played, you might throw the ball 30 times a game, and that's if it's fourth quarter and you're trailing. Otherwise, you're going to throw it 25 times maybe. Nowadays, quarterbacks throw the ball 50 times a game. So obviously, when you're throwing the ball double what the last guy did, you're going to have more yards. You're going to have more touchdowns. You're going to have more completions. But it doesn't mean you're better. It means you had more opportunities and more chances to break his records. Basketball is the same way. I can recall when I first started watching basketball back around 94, 95, and you watched the NBA, most of the NBA games, if you scored 100, you won most of the time. Scored 100 was a big thing back in the day. Now teams score 130 because the game is just played so much differently. A guy like James Harden, if he would have played 30 years ago, he would have had maybe 10 points and 8 rebounds a game. Because all James Harden does is make a living driving the lane, getting a foul called, going to the line, shooting free throws, making free throws. 30 years ago, when there was actually a little bit of contact allowed, if he'd have drove the lane one time against Shawn Kemp or Mutombo or Shaq, any of those guys, he'd have been clotheslined, and that'd have been the end of it. But that's just because the game has changed so much. The only game that really hasn't changed a whole lot is baseball, but hockey and football and basketball, the game has changed so much. And that's why I hate people say, oh, he's the best ever. No, he's not. Just because he has better stats doesn't mean he's better. There are things that go into being the greatest ever besides just what you've seen them do on the field or on the court. But I think it's obvious that if you've got an elite quarterback, you can win. If you don't, you can't. You can win 8 or 9 games against inferior teams, but as soon as you play a team that's as good as you are, if they got a better quarterback, they're going to beat you. Any thoughts on this? Please feel free to let me know. Let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. What do you get when you cross a fish and an elephant? Swimming trunks. And that wraps it up for today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.